Welcome to the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce.
The Falmouth Chamber is dedicated to working on behalf of our members to make Falmouth a better place to live, work, and conduct business. We are committed to developing the economic, cultural, educational, and civic interests of our community and welcome the support from all organizations to achieve our combined goals. Whether you call Falmouth home, are a summer resident, or a visitor, we hope you take advantage of all that the Chamber has to offer.
Holiday Inn Falmouth opened year-round for your business and travel needs. We provide a full restaurant and accommodations for banquets, holiday parties, weddings, corporate events, seminars, and more. Featuring KC Bar and Grill, where guests or Falmouth residents can enjoy our selection of local craft beers, cocktails, and a variety of pub food from our menu. Holiday Inn Falmouth, your home away from home.
Call the meeting to order for the Board of Selectmen.
Call the planning meeting to order.
Pledge allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome everyone to the joint meeting for the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. Jim, do you want to tee off the discussion on transportation?
Yes, we felt, our transportation committee is dissolved a few years ago. It's been an issue that hasn't really been addressed, and we are having our growth of our downtown, the travel, the shoppers and everything is going well, but everyone's talking about parking problems and transportation, and we thought it'd be good to have some discussion about some possible solutions. The one that I'll let my other board members bring it up, the one that comes to mind for me the most is relates to parking and some kind of transportation from the parking back to some kind of shuttle. The solution is what we've heard mentioned quite a bit in the past, and we don't have to build any structures to do it, and we could start taking advantage of the schools that are nearby downtown that have empty parking lots in the summertime, and maybe come up with some kind of route that would be able to connect people to the beaches and downtown and parking, and wanted to have discussion about that. That's just one piece. I don't know if anybody else has any others.
Well, I think it's an important discussion. It took me an extra half an hour to get to Town Hall this morning on my first trip up. And before we got more comments from planning, I wonder if Mr. Suso, if you want to just comment on the the letter from Senator DiMacedo with respect to the $150,000 potential grant, if there's an update or not on that, because that might cue into what you're suggesting.
Well, certainly, I'm happy to, Madam Chair. The Selectmen, as well as the Planning Board, may recall, late last year, there was a notification from Senator DiMacedo's office that some funds were being sought to be set aside for the purpose of a parking type evaluation for downtown Falmouth. It had some potentially fairly limiting issues that were arising, and we met on that and discussed it and got back to Senator DiMacedo, to whom I had crafted a letter back in December, just giving some background information on the town's efforts on really transportation planning in general, and it's sort of timely with the this being a topic the Planning Board has suggested for tonight. If I might, Madam Chair, just perhaps you could read through quickly. This funding would be used to supplement the town's current Main Street transportation study / design initiatives and incorporate a parking analysis within a broader comprehensive traffic flow system serving the downtown Falmouth area. Then provided a brief narrative. In 2015, I know the Selectmen and Planning Board will recall this. 2015, the town embarked on a comprehensive transportation planning initiative for the Main Street corridor that encompasses Palmer Avenue, Main Street, Davis Straits, Route 28, Jones Road, and numerous intersecting streets. The goal of the plan is to enhance safety and improve overall mobility and economic vitality. The study is expected to be finalized and designed during 2017 at a cost of approximately $450,000. Further, in anticipation of the expected construction improvements within that same study area, the town recently appropriated $350,000 at the November 2016 town meeting for design of 18,000 feet of a new 16-inch water main to be installed along the entire Main Street corridor. The main will replace an 1899 vintage 10-inch main and will be designed in 2017, with construction expected to commence in 2018 at a cost of approximately $5.6 million. Replacement of the water main is not only necessary but prudent in order to preserve the integrity of the subsequent surface improvements. And the Main Street Route 28 surface improvements are presently included for potential funding under the Commonwealth's Transportation Bond Bill in the amount of $8 million. The $5.6 million water main is to be fully funded separately by the town of Falmouth. And so this letter suggests where that $150,000 that is being sought by Senator DiMacedo could fit within that overall network of transportation analysis and potential improvements that then would the town could rally around and pursue effective transportation options. So that's it in a nutshell.
And I know you sought out an update from Senator DiMacedo this week. I'm just wondering if he had an opportunity to get back with you on that.
I do not have a written response as yet. As you indicate, I did request of the Senator's office that we have an update on accessing those funds and the timetable and process. And it was indicated from his office that we would be receiving a letter this week, but it's not yet arrived. So I'll look forward to sharing that with the board as soon as we receive it, and we are eager to include that in one of the many options available to the town.
So as soon as we get that information, Jim, we'll forward it to you for distribution to your board.
Okay.
But I just wanted to have that background presented along with the comments from the planning board.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Sam?
Just make a couple of comments. First of all, if anybody's ever been to Provincetown in the summertime, it is terrible. And of course, they have a worse configuration than we do in terms of access from only one direction, really, just a couple of roads. They use Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority to provide them with shuttles during the summertime. And there's, so it's a part-time, part-year type of service, which makes a lot of sense. They employ the people, they supervise them, just as they do the shuttle that we use during the summertime here in Falmouth. So if you're looking towards shuttle services, which I think is an excellent idea, you might want to think about talking to Tom Kerr, the director of CCRTA, and seeing just what kind of a program they might be able to provide the town. The second comment is basically, I get the economists, and they tend to give you an international perspective on what's going on around the world. There are a lot of major international cities that are now will not permit parking garages and parking lots anymore. And the reason is that it's become so congested and so pedestrian unfriendly because of the traffic that they're just saying, that's enough. No more cars in here. You know, take public transportation, park in satellite parking areas, and take a shuttle in. And I think we need to think about preserving the culture that we have in this town in terms of walkability and the shops and what have you. Because I think if we, some people have suggested, build a 2-story parking lot, you know, behind Main Street, it's going to take away many viewscapes that we enjoy. So that's it.
How does that fit into the plan?
Well, one other thing that I wanted to bring up, our board's discussed this in the past with transportation. I know it's a state agency and we can't do it, but we really need to stay connected to our village in Woods Hole too. There's a tremendous amount of people going back and forth. And I live on Woods Hole Road and I watch the empty white buses go by my house all day long, you know, one way or the other, and wondering why some way we can't work to, you know, use that facility as well as they're going back and forth and helping shuttle people instead of parking cars in Woods Hole, that people could just travel.
So you mean steamship buses?
Steamship, I was using the white buses, I should have identified. I meant
Just in case the
steamship.
public.
I'm sorry to be that vague. But I count one every 15 minutes, or even one every 10 minutes. And the wish goes by one an hour. And just something, thought process, I think if there's a way to, we've got all that transportation going up and down that highway, it should be used in a better fashion.
Partnership opportunity.
For all of us, yes.
To be aware, the Steamship Authority will take anybody on those buses. If you show up at the lot, you can get on the bus to go to Woods Hole, and the Woods Hole bus will
Tell
take you.
people about it, because they don't do it. I think that's part of what having a program and have it be public knowledge and publicized and have everyone know about it would be a huge difference.
So perhaps, Mr. Suso, if you think there's a way to contact the Steamship Authority and confirm that that's still the case, and then put it right on the town website, might be a good start.
Very good.
Maybe a signage here or there's where you catch it or whatever, but, or do you only catch it at their stop, or would they pick up any place else?
No, the stop is at the Steamship Authority
Okay.
lot and down Woods Hole.
Bob?
Right, and that's kind of the problem. If we could get them to make stops, identify certain places, the bike path, further up by McCallum Drive, some other, by the fire station, because I've seen people literally trying to wave a whoosh bus down and get passed by because the driver didn't see him or it was a bad spot for them to be at. So if we had regular stops, not only would it be something that people would be able to identify as a stop because it would be labeled as such, and they wouldn't have to go to one of the lots. They could come from some of the institutes that are along Woods Hole Road, grab the bus because we have a lot of students and all that there. But it also serves as traffic calming as well. If you're behind a bus and it's making stops, it'll slow people down because I'm telling you, like Jim, I live off of Woods Hole Road, and trying to get out onto Woods Hole Road, you're taking your life in your hands, especially with some of the sight lines that we deal with down there. So.
Pam?
I think in addition to that, especially this time of year between trying to get into town and going to the beaches, living right near Old Silver Beach, if we had shuttle services from whether it's the schools in town where people could come, park their car, shuttle comes by, drops them off either in town or at a beach, and picks them up again. I don't know if anyone's been to Ogunquit, but they have those trolleys that go up and down Route 1, pick them up, go to the beach. They run probably every 5 to 7 minutes. I mean, I think different towns have looked, in Acton, what we did, because we have transportation, we have a train that goes into Boston, so we opened up schools and churches and synagogues to park. Shuttle comes by, picks people up, drops them at the train, and also takes people. We sort of merged with the Roadrunner, and we used the Board of Health because we felt it was a public health issue. both from a safety standpoint, all the exhaust on the roads, and so the Board of Health actually took the initiative, and that's who got the funding and worked with the Board of Selectmen on that. And we have an amazingly vibrant shuttle service now in the town. So I think I'm a fervent believer in where there's a will, there's a way. And I think we could just get that traffic off. There were 42 cars backed up trying to get into Old Silver Beach. And all you need to do is just have a shuttle that drops you off, and you don't have to wait.
Sam?
And by the way, that shuttle system that is run up in Provincetown covers all the way down through Truro into Wellfleet.
Right.
I mean, it does go to all the recreational spots.
Megan?
Right.
I was just going to say the nice piece about sort of the configuration of our town is that we were talking at a meeting earlier this week about the school lots being really underutilized in the summer, and we do have school lots sort of in the general area of most beaches. It's just kind of the way that it is. So, you do have North Falmouth is not far from Old Silver and so forth. So, it does tend to be really probably the only lot that gets much use at all and it's fairly minimal, is the Mullen Hall lot. And even that's underutilized for the fact that people, every once in a while, if there's a big event, there'll be a lot of folks there, but I think a lot of people don't even know you can park there, and you're right in town able to get
Even
around.
on the Main Street Fair, it wasn't that loaded.
It wasn't even that full.
Yeah.
You all will have in your packets the Transportation Local Comprehensive Plan. We met with Ray Jack, and he was very kind to give us a lot of his time. So we had some good in-depth
You know he's right
conversation.
behind you, don't you?
No, I don't. Well, I won't lie. We got a lot of good information from him, commentary on all of this, what's already been done, what's being worked on. You'll see the commentary in italics. He was quite adamant that the only way to solve our parking problem is going to be with shuttles, and probably principally using the school parking lots. The trick is going to be, of course, to get people to use it. But we thought about that for years, and then it should be collaborative. Otherwise, to get shuttles, for the town to own shuttles, it will be pretty expensive.
One means that just came to mind when you said that, just in terms of changing folks' behavior, we already have a tool at hand, which is the parking meters that are, adjustable, and, so that just the way, in terms of our solid waste, we changed the fees to try to change the behavior. That's one thing I think the town manager could look at with the chief of police, just in terms of whether there might be, that might be a tool to achieve the goal that you just set out.
Well, and I knew you and Megan were looking at transportation very, very seriously, which is a very good thing. And so that's why I thought transportation would be an excellent first review. And DPW is so across the board in the transportation element. And also, you are very much involved with trying to push public input. Well, our public happens to be Christiana Collins. She is the one who's been coming most of the time, and you'll see a new action item in there that she suggested. Throwing it around here.
Just before you get there, can I ask a question?
Sure.
About one of the changes you suggest is to eliminate the requirement for outside contractors to use low-emission vehicles in their work for the town. And I was just curious about why that was eliminated, because I could think of, lots of ways to do it. The steamship is focused in some ways on that, and you could change an RFP or somehow incentivize. So I'm just curious why you thought that should be changed.
Because Ray said, oh boy, that's going to increase the costs to the town if we require that. You can try to look for the people who will do that, but if we put it in as a requirement, the contracts will become ever so much more expensive, and also limit the potential people that we could hire to do the job.
Yeah.
That's a good practical consideration.
You can keep it in mind, I think, and look for that, but to put it in as a requirement. So what we're looking for is, the planning board hasn't seen this before tonight either, and what we would really be looking for is your review of this and any other suggestions that should be added to this as action items, because this is a living document.
And would you want the board to review it and then correspond with you about some suggestions in a week or two?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Or anytime you feel that this is lacking, don't feel that it has to just be on an agenda and then you respond to the agenda.
Even so, Mr. Suso, if we could just put that on maybe a future agenda in a couple weeks or so.
And just,
Megan?
just sort of in the larger picture, a conversation that has come up before is, it's a piece of this, which is, really, particularly in the summertime, the police department has an enormous, piece of its energy that's diverted from really what should be, all the main things that we're concerned about, public safety and all of those things, to really dealing with a lot of these parking issues, because it continues to be a challenge. There are certain hot spots in town, obviously some, more so than others, but, to look at this kind of as a whole picture, when you're looking about kind of expanding the ability for us to have a number of individuals who are in town, enjoying the beaches, enjoying the shops without that extra congestion, and at the same time maybe alleviating some of that pressure on the police department that's already very stretched in the summer because our numbers are, just triple. So I think that it's really part of a bigger conversation about it's not just, do we want to take less time to get down Main Street, but how do we really want to maximize our tax dollars? Because we'd rather, I'm sure, have our police officers doing kind of their first course of business rather than worrying about moving cars along or people parking where they shouldn't and things like that. So.
And just to one mention, because I see Bikeways is in attendance, I don't want to not mention when we look at studying this, I think a very important element is to look for places where we can widen the roads and put a bike lane in. It's a difficult problem when there are places where traffic is stopped waiting to get around bikes, or there are a couple of young kids or families in the middle of the road, and that creates its own issue. But I think certainly when we look at places, we should always see whether there is an opportunity to create a bike lane, because I think alternative transportations, buses, and I think bikes, have to be considered. That's where the entire Cape is going, and looking at that as an issue. Pat?
One of the very good reasons for doing that, aside from safety, is that because of how our Bikeways Committee has really worked so hard, Falmouth is becoming a bikeway destination too. People come down here to bike. And I know when my kids visit from California, that's one of the things they look forward to doing, is just hopping on the bike path and going up to North Falmouth and coming back. And they do that a multiple amount of times. They love that. And then we've got other bikeways too. But I think the town has to be very adamant when you redesign the roads. You probably will remember when the road was repaved in East Falmouth, and the residents didn't want the 4-foot wide sidewalks. They were adamant, and so they didn't happen. So I think the town is going to have a very strict policy that when we redo a road, fine, we may not be able to have this on both sides of the road, but that one side will have an adequate, you saw this in the transportation study, an adequate sidewalk and an adequate bicycle path, both of them designed safely.
Rob?
Getting back to parking, to reduce parking problems, you have to make parking more difficult. And in Copenhagen, what they have done, they have reduced the parking in the city by 2% a year. So you don't see anybody driving in the city. Everybody bikes or takes public transportation. However, if we're going to do that, and I agree with Sam about not putting a parking garage downtown, and I'm not in favor of parking meters either. We really need to focus on the satellite system for shuttles. So you have to give people an alternative, better bikeways and better shuttle service to get them to where they need to be, so that they're not going to mind giving up their vehicle.
And dependability, by the way.
Doug?
It takes you 2 to 3 years to...
Yeah.
And so how do we implement shuttle service? Do we ask the RTA to expand services, or do we have to buy our own buses?
Well, I think, from my perspective, I think we look at the needs and look at the opportunities, and then certainly that would be one of them. I think Tom Cahere works a lot and comes up a lot to Falmouth with respect to seniors, for example, who are a heavy population in using the bus. So I think, simple question, what information do you already have with respect to Falmouth's use? Where do you, we could send a letter to him from the Board of Selectmen and say, we're really moving this as an initiative with the planning board, and you have some suggestions of where to start. So that would be one of the first things that I would do. Okay?
You may want to even, think about a first summer pilot program. And with getting the traffic off, I've been in communities where, for example, if you're coming, I'm not great with the street names, I think it's the byway, that little cutoff street, that's how I come down from North Falmouth, and then I cut over to get into this lot. Mm-hmm. There are directions for the bikes to move away from like the main congested street, and they would go off and around and have parking for the bikes. And we could also think of what they did in Boston, where you have they have it at North Station, where you have the bikes you can rent, mm-hmm. pick them up in North Station, so you come into town, over and around, you get a bike, and but it might be worthwhile to think about just doing a pilot for a spring, summer. Mm-hmm. But getting the bikes off the main roads, I think, is also...
It's at least a 2-year pilot. You don't change people's habits like that, and you won't get good data unless you
Okay,
establish
Sam, I'll concede. We could do a pilot for 2 summers. But I mean, I think you have to start somewhere.
And Bikeways Committee would be very helpful. They have so much information. They're looking at this hard. So
I think you need to do both, because we want to get the cars out, but the bikes, with those kids going in and out of those in between cars with their bikes, is really dangerous.
So the day that the 42 cars were parked up at Old Silver Beach in line, how was the beach?
I honestly, I have not gotten to the beach because I don't get there early enough, so there's never parking.
Didn't we
I'm not sure.
this?
I mean, one thing is I'm not sure I'd want to have more people getting there. I mean, if the beach itself is already crowded, and we brought more buses up there to get more people, would that be what we want? The way to change their behavior would be saying, actually, we're not going to have a parking lot there. The only way of getting to the beach is either by bike, by walking, or by the shuttle, and we don't have cars there. Then you'd change that behavior right away and say, yep, the way to get there is park at North Falmouth Beach, at North Falmouth School, or one of the other schools, and you can ride the shuttle.
Singing Beach in Manchester has always been that way, and it's had a good effect.
We have people from all over that send bus rides to Old Silver Beach. From Boston areas, they come from everywhere to get to our beaches. We should do it ourselves.
Right.
Well, and if I may, I just think one of the other things is part of the reason, I mean, it's a fabulous beach. It's a bigger sort of sandy beach space, but there's also some facilities there, and that's part of it. I mean, there are certain beaches that people gravitate towards because there are certain facilities. So if you're going with a bunch of kids, you want some place to get a snack, you want a bathroom, you want, so I think that's part of, the conversation further down the road. But if the goal is to just kind of see how we can alleviate some of the pressure on, we may not immediately alleviate the pressure of 42 people waiting. There may really be diehards that want to get in there, but over time you probably will. And if folks understand I can park somewhere for free and take a shuttle for however many dollars or whatever, maybe it's free or a few dollars, and that's cheaper than buying the sticker for the week that I'm here. I mean, these are all ways that people kind of make decisions about their vacations, right? If they think they're just going to go for an afternoon, that sounds like a great possibility for them. So I think, yes, probably a couple of years of trying something out, and you do, potentially change some behaviors.
That's, I think, all great ways in terms of the planning piece of it, the summer versus the year-long piece of it, bikeways piece of it. I think we have a good outline for the work that needs to be done next. And so I'd like to just pass this back to Jim with respect to the housing supply, unless anyone has any final points.
We did actually in East Falmouth want sidewalk, and when they did the last repaving, we had to get a petition in order to require a sidewalk from Seacoast to Kenyon. I think it was the T-ticket section that was opposed to changing that meandering, winding path.
Good point. Jim?
Just to tell you, the state spent a lot of money on both the Davisville intersection and Davis Straits. And if you drive those intersections right now, you notice there's a little bit more room. The turns are a little bit easier. You can actually feel it when you're there, but you go 50 yards down and it disappears. That complete streets concept that we are integrating into all our plans is important, and you can see the beginnings of it being laid right now and connecting. But if anyone drives those areas, you'll see it. You'll see the little, they fit whatever we can fit. That we take the maximum right away we have and use it the best way we can. Okay.
Absolutely. Housing supply.
So,
I think Bob had a comment.
Yeah, just a couple of comments before on
Sorry about that.
transportation.
Yep.
We've had discussions about the extending the rail, the bike trail up through to Bourne, and we really would not like to see the rail raised. We'd like to keep the rail line open, and I read in the paper from your last meeting how the military really needs that rail line, and I think any attempt to rip that up and replace it with a bike path only, I think is not in our best interest. So I would support a bike trail beside the rail, and I know it's going to cost more, but I think that's the only way we should go.
Appreciate that. That is definitely going to be part of an ongoing discussion. I believe we have another agenda item on that very subject on the 31st.
You asked the legislator's letter to be placed on the agenda, that's what.
Okay, so that, in any event, we'll follow up with you in case you want to put in a written statement, just so that you know about that.
Unless we find that there's another option for the military to mobilize out the other side of the base over to the Sandwich side, which Dylan Fernandez is going to be asking about. I don't know if it's this week or very, very soon in the near future. I just had a meeting about that. So.
But there are a lot of other uses for that rail, just besides the military, too. And when it comes to solid waste removal from the Cape, Bourne isn't going to be open forever.
Right.
So.
It's ironic, though, that the new contractor is the one who was taking the trash to the Bourne dump by truck rather than to the transfer station, because it was more feasible to use the truck to the dump.
Yeah, but that's not going to be an option forever.
Yeah.
Pat?
That isn't the only reason. There is a vulnerability, if we get a massive hurricane in here, of the vehicle bridges. And I just read recently, because I had a question, well, why wouldn't the railroad bridge be so vulnerable? Well, I guess it's structurally not the same. So it has less capacity to be destroyed, if you will, by a huge hurricane. And Pam knows from Katrina what happened. They were barging everything in. And that would be our only other option if we did not have that railroad bridge there to bring supplies in to haul trash away until other bridge or bridges could be constructed there too. So you not only have the military, but you have that. And if we did not have the trash train, those bridges are aging. You keep reading that. And they're doing patchwork right now. So you get massively heavy trucks and more of them going across the bridges. That doesn't help. So there are a whole bunch of reasons that Bob didn't bring out. He's got a draft letter that a lot of that is in that draft letter too.
Certainly, those are all very crucial points, and I really want to reiterate to the planning board, the selectmen welcome any thoughts the planning board may have that, instruct us on that topic. And if we're ready?
On housing? Well, 3 years ago, or sometime past, we had a huge housing summit. We identified, that our population was shrinking and aging at the same time, and that we had, it was some of the reasons why we don't have younger people here is because they didn't have any place to live. So it was 3 areas were identified for us to start working on. One was the accessory apartment bylaw, which we have just finished. The other two was a multifamily housing district, which we don't have. People say, oh, we don't have a place you can build an apartment in town. There's no zone for it. There's some zones where it's allowed by special permit, but it's not the primary use of it. So it's never really been considered. And young people can afford apartments. And not that we want to build apartments everywhere, but that's what the experts tell us, that we have to have housing for people. So we are going to be working on that in the next year or so, and the other issue is the conversion. We have a conversion bylaw that allows homes to be converted to up to 4 units. Something was done in the 80s primarily to protect great big old houses that were being torn down. The idea was that without making any changes to the outside, that they could be converted into 1s, 2s, or 3s, or up to 4. 4 is problematic on building code issues. It triggers sprinkler laws and all kinds of things. So what mostly has happened, I think we had 20 or 30 of them done. We looked at it. They've been 2s and 3s that are done. But the law was passed in 1980. And so the house is restricted to houses that were built as of 1980. It might be time to update that. We plan to study that and have public hearings, and we'd be looking for your thoughts on it as well as the public, and crafting another bylaw to take to town meeting, and then we'll be working on it. And also with the other tool that we would like to have is we have a transfer of development rights in our books right now. It's hardly ever used. We would like to see if there's a way that we could actually have a real tool, we could do some planning on it. For instance, the idea in concept is you have an area where you don't want housing because it's a sensitive area, and you have another area where you do want housing. The idea would be keeping the net housing the same, but moving the density away from the areas that you don't want it, conservation type areas or flooded areas, or 2 areas where you do want it, which would be have sewers, public transportation, and better routes. It's really early in the concept, but these are the things that we've identified, and some of our members are going to be taking the point on it and trying to work these over the next year or 2. Pam, did you have some issues with the conversion bylaw?
No, I think I had just mentioned the town of Acton has a long-standing conversion bylaw as well as a transfer of rights, transfer of development rights. I mean, I don't think we need to recreate the wheel here because many other towns have been very successful with it. But, you know, I was driving around thinking if we could find a place for like an Avalon development to come in to build a lot of apartments, and I can't figure out where it could go. I mean, it could go on Brick Hill, it could go on certain places where there's open land, but that's something, I mean, I think Charlotte and I will work on for the multifamily housing, which could be a large development, which would also boost our housing stock so we don't have to deal with 40B anymore.
Megan?
And just to that end, and I know that Planning Board and other, the town as a whole and different departments have looked at this, but, you know, I think we sort of talk about having this housing stock, but I think we really need to be clear about what it is. You know, sometimes I think these things about, you know, a 1-bedroom apartment. Well, you know, that's somewhat useful, but we really need to have some research behind who are the folks who aren't being served by our current housing, you know, stock and availability. What, you know, sort of, do we have some kind of lower priced apartments to help people who are kind of just starting out, you know, working? We need to have some interim for people who, you know, are young but maybe haven't decided to settle down here. I mean, you know, there has to be some thoughtfulness and strategy to, it's not just about building stock, it's about building it to serve the people who we really want to have stay in our community, because we recognize that we're losing a lot of folks. So thinking about, you know, across the board, who we're trying to serve and how those apartments are configured and what the price points need to be to get people to be able to stay, because, you know, we are just having the whole Cape, Massachusetts as a whole has it, right? People are just kind of leaving the state because it's very expensive to live here. So I think we just, you know, I know that's part of the research that everyone does, but we really need to be thoughtful about, you know, it's a large investment for anybody, you know, for any builder to put into, for the town to put into whatever piece they might. So
what our new committee that is looking at all the existing studies on, you know, climate change and how the community can adapt, we can really do the same thing here, because just most recently, and I'm sure planning might already know, Heather Harper just completed for the Cape Cod Commission a study exactly on that issue in terms of looking at demographics, looking at, how older folks want to stay maybe in a small one-level ranch and maybe get rid of a very large, expensive to run home. And so all those specifics, I think that study in particular can be very useful for. I was on the board that reviewed all the data before it went into print, and there were a lot of housing experts on that board, which really tweaked the information. And if it was from census information or other kind of stock pieces, numbers, we really, honed it so that we felt it fit more the communities that it was supposed to represent. So I think that is the key point, and it looks like the Cape Cod Commission did recognize that to make that information a resource for our town for moving that forward. And I know Doug and then Sam had a...
And I was just wondering if if the planning board has been thinking about the housing production plan, and I'm wondering who is actually going to take the lead on getting another housing production plan in place, because it lapsed back in 2013, and it's not clear who's really working on that.
The Affordable Housing Committee has been working on that. And that's, I thought Holly was going to be here tonight.
It's in process.
I don't see her. It is in the process.
Okay.
Sam?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Jim.
Well, just to answer kind of Doug's question, I wanted to just, one of the things that we're looking at was using the Cape Cod Commission and their visioning planning and looking into Davis Straits. And for us, the Davis Straits is going to be a change in, and to make it work is a change in density. That's the spot I was actually suggesting. It's on the sewer, it has public transportation, and we have other lands around it where we don't want it. And if we were to develop long range, this is not something that's going to happen right away, but the transfer of development rights could make that possible to rebuild that in a greater density, more like Mashpee Commons than a giant parking lot that we have right now, with housing on the second and third floors. And we're going to focus, well, I'm going to try to keep that on the agenda and move that forward throughout the next year. I'll be focused on that issue alone, and then other members are going to take other issues in particular and run with them and just try to keep someone on point on every one of those things. We haven't addressed the housing production plan, but we are still working on the issues that the last study generated 3 years ago, the things, what they called low-hanging fruit,
Right.
And we're still trying to get it. So that's where we are focused on, that's really our mission in the next year.
And before Sam, I just want to comment that Jim attended the East Falmouth Village Association meeting that Doug chairs to announce that to folks, so that, in terms of community outreach, that's already started, at least in terms of identifying that issue a little bit. Sam?
Yeah, you mentioned Heather Harper and the study they've been doing on housing was reported out at the Cape Cod, the One Cape Summit. Michael Crane, I think, took an interesting perspective. He basically said, if you have a certain salary, what's a reasonable house? How much should you be paying towards your housing? And since my son has been looking at housing, in fact, he just purchased a house in Connecticut, basically I said, all right, let's take 30% of your salary and let's look for housing in that range. Now, fortunately, in his area, there's plenty to choose from, but on the Cape, not so. And I think you have to be able to say, this is what's going to determine the market for those developers, because we're not going to build them. It's going to be private developers who are going to basically be able to say, yeah, I'm going to be able to sell these or rent these in a market that I know exists. So I think we probably should be looking at just, what are the needs here in terms of housing, and then finding the opportunities to develop those. And of course, we have to have the zoning that supports that kind of development.
John?
I think that what Megan described is the job for the housing coordinator that the town, that the CPC funded last year. And it describes how desperately we need that position filled. Because do we need 500 apartments? And if we do, what level of income? Do we need 300 new homes? Do we need 12-story buildings? What do we need? Everybody wants housing, everybody knows we need housing. What is the formula? What is the mix? Hence, we funded the housing coordinator, which I know Mr. Sousa is trying to fill that position, but it's pretty critical, because us as a planning board, we'd like to plan But as one of the tools, what does the future need? What's the present and what's the future? And without that information, we're kind of going about it, we're going about it, but are we doing it correctly?
That's a good point, Megan.
And I just think to that point, you know, this is, it's a large undertaking, right? So that position is really, that person is the key person to meet with the planning board, develop some relationships with builders and contractors and developers so that, you know, the plan isn't just pie in the sky, right? Okay, great, so we need 1,000 that can rent for $1,000. You know, that may not be something that's workable in that way. So I think, you know, that position is definitely going to be really critical. And I think the other component, and it speaks to Jim talking about the Davisville or Davis Straits project, is that it's really the public education, because we get some of these great ideas and then people hear the words apartments and they think they have some negative connotations, and people don't want these type of developments in their part of town. And so I think we have to constantly be doing that education around why it's so vital to develop and plan and build in this way, because it, you know, it really is supporting our economy and the long-term vitality of our community. So I think there's an education. Yes, and
revitalize, just like Mashpee Commons.
Yes.
That's a hot spot now. John again, and then Rob.
I would just like to make one other comment, because the word 40B came up in this conversation. And everybody knows where Atria is. Probably everybody has a favorable opinion of Atria. Atria is a 40B development. Not many people know that. And so it can have good results, and it can have results not so good if you're a neighbor and you don't want it there. But 40B done correctly is a development tool for any community. It can be adversarial, or it can be positive.
Important point, Rob.
Oh, on John's point, we're trying to create friendly 40Bs as a planning board. But getting back to, oh geez, I'm having a senior moment here. The transfer of development rights.
Join the club.
I got misled. The transfer of development rights, the current bylaw was developed more for 10-lot subdivisions as opposed to maybe a single lot here and there, and the donor and the receiving districts and things like that. And we're just trying to simplify that. It's been on the books, but there have been times we've looked at each other and said, geez, wouldn't it be nice to have a transfer of development rights for this type of situation here, and we don't have it. So that's what we're trying to do with this.
The other thing with the updating the housing plan, there are so many entities in this town between the Housing Trust and the Housing Authority, and there are, I think, 5 entities that have something to do with affordable, varied income, whatever you want to call it. That housing person could be sort of the person that keeps track of those units, because there is no one single person in this community that knows whether you have a housing unit that you may have purchased and somebody else is living in it now. And because the town only works on a complaint that you have to sign your name to, and if you're living in a particular community and you don't want to sign a complaint because your neighbors could do whatever, then you don't make that complaint, and somebody illegally is living in that home. So we at the Affordable Housing Committee are hoping that the housing coordinator will also help coordinate so that there is a singular list of how many 2-bedrooms, how many 3-bedrooms, because people apply and there's a very, very long waiting list for housing here. And, you know, we also know that young people today aren't that anxious to buy as they used to be. So they're in apartments for longer because they're much more transient than they used to be, and they're not bound to IBM or Raytheon or anything else. They'll hop from place to place to place to startups. And so I think in order to bring them back, we need sort of workforce housing, and we need seasonal housing. And you ought to come to an Affordable Housing Committee meeting and just sit, as Sam does, and listen, because I mean, I think we're making progress, but it's so slow.
Well, I think the housing coordinator position being filled will certainly move these issues. I saw Mike
Absolutely.
Galasso come in, and I can tell you
He's
that
right there.
he chairs the EDIC.
Right.
We spend a lot of time on the symbiotic relationship between jobs and housing. And I'm subject to Mike's thoughts. I think it might even be interesting to have, the housing come to possibly an EDIC meeting and kind of look at that together. That's just one other avenue that came to mind. Jim, did you have?
No, but I would just want to make the discussion, at least the way we do it now, we first create, we don't decide where anything goes. First, we decide what it's going to look like, what the new zoning would be, the density of, we were going to have, okay, instead of 6 units per acre, we're going to have 10 or 12. And then we decide what we want in that package, and then we get that approved by town meeting. And then we decide where we want it. So it's a two-phase thing. We can't simply go out and say, hey, we're going to put 40 units here. Because we don't have the district to put there yet. It's really a two-step process. So the discussion is creating the district first that we all buy in on and say, yeah, that's a good idea. Now where are we going to put it? And that's really a two-step process. Because we can't just say, okay, let's put, well, the town could do that, but I don't advise the town should just go out and do things without permits. We should follow the process and have that discussion and create these districts or overlay districts. If it's not a specific zoning district, it's an overlay district, but it has all the same components on it. So I just want everyone to be kind of thinking the same fashion. We just don't go out and build something. We first, it's a two-step process. I just wanted to plant that thought.
And back to your original thought, really starts with community outreach. And
Right.
that's something the planning board is so attuned to and does very well, especially with the accessory apartment issue. I know there was a lot of outreach on that. Do you have any update on how that's going?
Well, yeah, a little bit. The Board of Health has taken a view that, which they didn't take for the previously accessory apartment bylaws or for previous conversions, but now they say we need to have 2 septic tanks, which is a pretty, so even though you're not changing the buildings in the house, if you apply for an accessory apartment, I went down with a couple applicants and went through it and were told they can't do it unless they redesign. They have a 4-bedroom septic system, but they want them to put in another tank, which is they have to put in another 1,000-gallon tank. And it's just a pretty heavy thing. We would like to have some discussions with them to get an understanding to see if that is real or where that comes from. But that adds, one of these things is the more cost and the more rules you put into these things, the harder they are to get done. And it seems as they have created a new rule that we have to now find another hurdle to move forward.
New deal breaker.
Pam?
Well, I had gone with a friend of mine who was ready to put her house on the market and learned that we have a pond
Coastal pond overlay.
overlay district. And the majority of Falmouth, other than most of Woods Hole and a little swath in the northern part of Falmouth, everything else is in that district. So the interpretation from the Board of Health is it becomes a multifamily home, and you need an AI system in any of that coastal pond overlay district. So they have had any number of people that have come in, but they don't want to spend $16,000 on an AI system. And that wasn't, I think Virginia, Valier, I'll get it, brought that up at town meeting. And, but it's real, and that's how it's being interpreted. So unless you're in a zone that has the sewers, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And that was clearly not the intent of the accessory bylaw. It was to allow people that had extra space in their house, extra bedroom, they could put a stove, they could put a refrigerator, and create this, separate entity.
Well, it seems, we're really balancing things in terms of all of the tremendous investment that the town has made with respect to our water quality issues. I certainly think that's, a valid thing to protect. So it sounds like there are a little bit of continuing conversations, maybe with the health department, as the chair has suggested.
Right, we knew when, and going forward, it became clear there was two areas that we weren't changing. One, we weren't going to change the state building code because that's not the planning board's job. And two, we didn't want to do the Board of Health issues. So we had to ensure them that that was going to be their call, not ours. And the planning board has required, even for newer subdivisions in those areas, to have denitrification systems in, only because our coastal ponds are so important to protect. I guess we might be dreaming. We're hoping somebody's going to come up with a solution. You know, some kind of system that works, or a cost-effective system that would allow these things to happen. Or sometimes, if there's enough pressure, somebody does figure out a way to do it.
Well, in the Water Quality Collaborative, that has, I'm a former member, and there just been a lot of work. Ray Jack is working with them now. All of the experimentation that is getting done on the Cape, really more so, I think, than anywhere else in the country, is going to benefit these issues and others, because as things, as the experiments get successful, the technology gets less expensive. And so I think all of these pieces will eventually fit together, but the first thing we have to do is plan for them. I see Charlie McCartney in the audience. Is everyone ready to move to the coastal resiliency topic?
So may I just make one
Sure,
comment?
of course.
Because we're all focusing on what I consider traditional apartments, houses. And when you're looking for the housing coordinator and when you're reaching out for public discussion of issues, I really would like to have some discussion done on new and innovative forms of housing. We are not a unique community here on the Cape. Any coastal community is having these issues of way too expensive, and you can't find people who can work here and live here. The worker people, the ones who serve you in the restaurants, the ones who serve you in the drugstores. So I would like to have included in any kind of a discussion on housing something that might be new and innovative, because then we can deal with that too from a zoning aspect, perhaps.
I think that's a hugely important point. In fact, the EDIC recently had Beth Colt as one of our speakers, and the main point that Beth made after thanking the town for its quick action in the kitchen fire that one of her restaurants had was workforce housing, and what that should look like, sort of a dorm style, and the fact that that's not allowed. And that's also something that EDIC puts a lot of focus on. And I don't know, Mike, if you want to give us 60 seconds, but you know, there are a lot of innovative ideas in terms, before Charlie, just 1 second here, in terms of just innovative housing ideas that the EDIC has looked into.
Hi, good evening everyone. Michael Glassel, Chairman of the Falmouth EDIC. And you know, Beth mentioned, you know, her need that she has, and it's throughout our community, obviously, for innovative workforce housing. And if you did see in the Standard Times last week that one of the resorts down the Lower Cape, I think in Brewster, was actually going to be bringing in some temporary prefab housing just for the workforce that they need in the resort. One thing that I have built over a number of years are micro units, actually smaller than the ones that we built here in town at 350 square feet. That's very dense. It's a lot of units, and one of the things that made that happen in the communities I worked in was a reduction in parking. So we're able to get a lot of units in a very, very small area, and those really serve the workforce in the community. That's what they're intended for, the way that they're structured, the amenities that they have. So I think that's a model that we should look at expanding here, and I think that will help solve some of that problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam.
Well, it just dawned on me, when Pat mentioned Katrina, and all of us responders were living in trailers. And they put these trailers together, and in some areas they've maintained them, because as they were rebuilding, they needed housing for builders that were coming in, and there was not enough housing, especially after all the damage that was done. And so they sort of put them on permanent platforms and actually hooked them up to septic, other than which was much better than having a pan underneath it, which is what we had. And they've maintained a great deal of that, because even 10, 12 years later, they are still rebuilding parts of New Orleans. And I love the idea of tiny houses. Nantucket has a bylaw now for tiny houses, and they're inexpensive, they're movable, and I think we could have a wonderful little village of tiny houses that maybe don't require heat if they're just for seasonal workers, or do seasonal workers go out, and then we have workforce housing. But I think there are ways to do it that, again, what Pat said, I think we need to be innovative and just look outside the box.
My grandparents lived in a trailer in Florida. They're transported by rail to disaster situations. So these topics are kind of all coming together. But if there's nothing else, I just do want to ask, Charlie McCaffrey was kind enough to come with just kind of a quick update on the newly formed Coastal Resiliency Committee. So welcome, Charlie.
Thank you. It is early, but first, based on your other discussion and another hat that I wear, I'm the town's representative to the Cape Cod Commission, and I'm serving on the update of the regional policy plan. And I want to say that one of the areas that the Commission will be looking to emphasize much more in the new regional policy plan is housing. And the issues that you're talking about, you mentioned Heather Harper is doing the research, and this will get reflected into the policy and action recommendations from the Commission. They throw out one statistic: 85% of the housing on Cape Cod is a single-family home on a single lot. There just isn't housing choice, regardless of the market price, whether it's affordable or high-end. It's not there unless you want a single-family home. Two other points, picking up on your previous discussion, that do relate to coastal resiliency. The discussion about parking and the beaches, and it occurred to me as you were discussing that, over the long term, if we didn't have as much parking at our beaches could be more resilient as sea level rises and erosion occurs. And we were shuttling people, we'd have a lot more space for our beaches. Additionally, on the subject of transfer of development rights, making that more usable in the long term, I could see that happening in this is long term. When areas of our town that are in floodplains become no longer really habitable or close to that, people own that property. Transfer of development rights would allow us to restrict development, but let them maintain their equity by selling their development rights. And I think for more sophisticated transfer of development right programs, it's probably premature for that here, but you need to create a development bank. That's how you get to use it for the single ones, because that you can't transfer, but you can take the development rights, put it in the bank, take money out of the bank, and pay for those development rights. So with that, the Coastal Resiliency Committee has only met 3 times. We had an organizational meeting and 2 meetings where we began to familiarize ourselves with the issues. So what I sort of just want to give you some sense of the thinking. It's important in looking at coastal resiliency. We need to define more specifically what the issues are. We sort of know generally. But define clearly what the natural processes are that lead to a risk. The erosion, flooding, severe storms, increased rainfall, sea level rise. And understand that all of these natural processes are good things. Erosion, flooding, storms actually provide benefits to us as well as cause problems. It's what gives the beach and the landscape along the coast its character. Erosion leads to beaches. Heavy rain, sediments may help wetlands maintain themselves, etc. But we also have substantial human and economic activity going on to take advantage of the natural area that has been created. So it's understanding, and that's the relationship between how we use the coastal areas and the forces that form those areas. And fortunately, that understanding is increasing. So we need to be able to draw on that and continually refine that as these problems grow over the future. And in looking at trying to define the problem, particularly for we need to think about timing. The problem won't be the same 20 years from now as they are today. The ways in which you can deal with it may be different then. What needs to be done then may be different. And that varies with a variety of issues. For example, planning board probably knows that as you design for storms, the 25-year, the 10-year storm, that's changing. And we need to have a way in which the standards for doing that can change as the actual rainfall conditions change. What we're doing now, two things. We're getting expert advice. We're setting up a series of people coming to the meeting. We've got next meeting, somebody is coming on the community rating system. Then we're having somebody from the Cape Cod Commission. The Cape Cod Commission was one of a handful of places in the country that received major grants on coastal resiliency. They received a grant, federal grant of $780,000 to analyze coastal resiliency. And they're working on that. What they want to come up with is a suite of options on how you can adapt to be resilient. So we'll have Heather McElroy, who's this staff person at the Cape Cod Commission, come to the committee and talk about what their research is doing and how they're focusing on creating the tools that communities on the Cape can use. Rod Thiele, a coastal geologist with USGS, will be talking. He was one of the people who was on the Coastal Resources Working Group, which created a report several years ago, which the Selectmen accepted, that analyzed what are the coastal processes along Falmouth, Vineyard Sound, and Buzzards Bay shoreline, and how the changes we've made, the structures we've put in, how is that affecting it? So he will be giving us an update on that report. And the Wacoya NEARS has done a good bit of work on wetland adaptation to sea level rise, which is something we should be familiar with. And I think we'll want to hear from Mass CCM. But I think the next task I want to cover with the program is outlining how we will structure a report, so that as we gather information, we have some place to begin to report it. Not that we'll have a report soon, but we need a structure. We need a structure to record this information and to have a way in which we convey recommendations. So I think we need a report that clearly defines the issues. Much of that is available in general, but we'll want to adapt them to Falmouth. I have talked with Bob Shea, and Bob has a lot of information. For example, the historical shoreline. He has all of that, so we know where the shoreline was in 1830, where it was in 1850. I'm making these dates up, but this is 1890, 1930. We can look at how the shoreline has changed and what caused that and how we can expect that to change in the future. One of the committee members, Andy Ashton, is a coastal geologist, and he will be looking at the various predictions of sea level rise. Which predictions make the most sense? What range of predictions for us to use for our planning purposes? I think we'll want to document and summarize what are all the programs that exist now. How could these programs, if they're local, be changed or adapted? What are the local laws that affect how we manage the coast to make it more resilient? We'll need to talk, where is there a need for capital projects, for administrative changes? And I want to create a structure that's organized in this way so that as an idea comes up, is this a proposed administrative change? Well, this is what we'll record that, at least initially, till we're ready to get acceptance of a major report. I also don't want to wait, and the committee's talked about this, we don't want to wait. You've given us 3 years. Yes, at the end of 3 years, there'll be a comprehensive report. But as we identify approaches we need and can advance the recommendations now, we'll want to do that because I think we need to show that we're progressing. We also discussed that we think it's important to make a presentation at town meeting, to keep town meeting educated as to what we're doing. You know, the first few presentations are not going to have recommendations, but I think we want to have a broader understanding of what the issues are that we will be facing, so that if and when there are some difficult recommendations, we've developed some education to understand why that may be necessary. So briefly, that's sort of where we are now. We've got a lot of work to do.
Well, it was created to be an action committee, so I'm very buoyed to hear, you know, the comprehensiveness of what you're looking at. Obviously, you know, the things that you're working on have a direct effect on both our health and our economy and our, you know, our homes. So this is, you know, I think the thing I like the most is the interim reports that you're going to be giving, so that other, you know, other boards, whether it's the selectmen or planning, can use the information with the work that they're doing. I want to compliment Doug Brown again for really kicking us all into getting this going.
Yeah. I think that's true, and then, but it also needs to be the long term, because we have issues 50 years from now that we've got to begin thinking about now. And the issues here are evolving. So I think it's also important maybe to develop a set of policy guidance for the board. You know, yes, we'll have specific, but when things come up that you're not sure, here's a set of policy guidelines that you can use to react to things that we haven't anticipated. So
Does anyone
try to include that.
Anyone have any questions? Doug?
Just a reminder about the fact that even though you're doing a lot of this long-range planning, we need those action items, like the vulnerability assessment that we're working toward now. And each year, or twice a year, we're probably going to need some sort of action to keep.
Well, I think one good one is, at our next meeting, the person who's the county has hired to advise on the community rating system. That's something that could be done. It requires a lot of work, but it's gathering data and doing it. And I talked to Bob Shea about it. He says he has a lot of information and is very interested in that. And that could be it gives us information that's useful, but it also is a way to get public support because it saves people money on their flood insurance.
Right.
But we have to document what we're doing. But it may indicate, and it's a scale, so you get, the more you've done over and above basic flood insurance, the bigger the discount people get. Well, we may find we can get up to 10%. But if we only did this, we could get 15 or 20%. So we may begin to identify areas where we could do more that would have the positive benefit of, at least in the near term, making flood insurance more affordable.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm referring to. If there's items like that we need to take action on, just send us an email and say, get moving on this.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Mr. Suso.
Madam Chair, just I thought it would be timely to mention that we have a real-life issue that's confronting the town regarding, that may spark potentially a resiliency discussion, and that is the repair to the Chappaquay Bridge seawall, which was damaged in a recent storm. And we have Jim McLaughlin and Peter McConerty with us here this evening as well, and they commented on that, as you know, Madam Chairman, at the West Falmouth Village Association annual meeting. That is a project which, at least in part, is likely to be coming forward in the November town meeting. And you'll recall, as I do, that we had an individual even that evening questioning why the town would be putting any money into a project that is going to primarily benefit private landowners in a private roadway. And, I think the comment was very good at the time, and that was that the majority of our neighborhoods are on private streets that are connected to a public roadway. So it's not unlike that. However, the seawall, of course, is an issue which has coastal resiliency implications in Chappaquoit. So I just raised that from the standpoint of context, that this is something that's constantly going to be arising and is going to generate discussion and is an item for some public debate. And if it would be timely, I'm sure Peter or Jim could comment on that further, but I just bring it up in general.
Sure. Peter, Jim, do you want to give us a minute or two? And the next question for me would be, if you have something maybe that could be put on the town website, if folks want to take a look, because I know the engineering that was done, in some detail is very instructive. So maybe if you could just do kind of a 2-minute outline.
Sure. Jim McLaughlin, town engineer. We've engaged a consulting firm, Applied Coastal, that's done a fair amount of work in the past. In fact, they did the design for the repair that was done about 4 or 5 years ago for another section of the roadway that had failed. And they're putting together a design for basically the remainder of the public way from the private roadway south down to the beach parking area. And that's about 750, 800 feet in length. And the estimate that we're working on is to do all of that work is about $1.5 to $1.7 million. The most critical area, which is about 200 feet, right just beyond the beach area, is where we have right now restricted to one-way traffic. The road is failing. There's a good-sized sinkhole where the water gets in behind the existing wall and is undermining it, and the road itself is sinking quite a bit. So in the short term, I think, and that really is the only way into that neighborhood. Not only does it provide access to the residents, it also provides public safety, fire, police. Also, the water main is in that roadway, which, in addition to obviously the public water supply, provides fire protection to that neighborhood. So, all of those issues, I think, point towards getting at least this section of it completed in a timely fashion, where it's already failing.
Is that 1.5 number design build?
Yeah, that's for the entire section. This first area, though, the first 200 feet, basically about a third of that is what I think is more of an immediate need. But we are doing the design for the entire stretch of the road.
Makes sense, Megan?
I just had a question, just that area is such a tough area, right? I mean, it's just constantly being bombarded, and it's been an issue that the town has dealt with for a while. In those designs, and again, it's a conversation, maybe further conversation for another time, but it's exactly what Charlie's sort of talking about. Some of that long-term planning, in the short term, if it's 1.5 to kind of get us back to where we are now, but it's, I don't know, just if you picked any number, 2.5 to build a bridge that might last 20 years. I mean, I just think, those if it's 1.5 and then in 3 more years it's 1.5, and I mean, at some point, some of those, bless you, longer term, planning around, it's exactly what the action committee has been asked to do to some extent. And obviously with the sinkhole there, yes, there's some stuff that has to happen immediately, but it would just be interesting to, understand what that full amount will get us in terms of what we expect the environment to be like and continue to be like there, how long it's anticipated that would, and I'm not asking for an answer tonight, I'm just saying in the long term, I think when we ask town meeting to vote on these numbers, a lot of concern sometimes, because we all have lived on the coastline, is, okay, it's 1.5 now, but the next giant storm, what happens to that structure? And, does it make sense to do structure B instead, that's a little bit more but lasts longer? So just just a thought that intersects with what your committee's doing.
Doug?
So at the end of the, where the town property ends, is that the end of the planning? And does the problem extend beyond that? And if so, is there collaboration with the neighbors?
Yeah, we're talking about going right up to where the posts are, which is the end of the public way. Beyond that, in the private section, I think they have a similar issue. And I do know that the associates have engaged a study to look at the, and what they did is they went out and did a ground penetrating radar study to see what condition they could glean from what's below the pavement itself. So they're looking at it, and I expect that we're going to be sharing information back and forth. I did share with them our plan, and we will get it up on the website. And they are going to be giving us copies of their reports also, so that we can collaborate between ourselves.
Right, because we don't want to invest money in something if they're not, if it's going to be the same problem down there.
Makes sense. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, could I also mention one thing is that, just as to succeed Charlie's comments as chair of the Coastal Resiliency Action Committee, I wanted to note just for the board that Jen McKay, our Conservation Administrator, is the staff liaison to that committee, and I appreciate very much her making her time available and her expertise in support of that important effort, as well as staff support from her office for minutes and assistance with drafting agendas and getting them posted, working with Chair McCarthy and undertaking that good work. So I want to acknowledge that as well.
Good
Appreciate Jen being with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The expertise is crucial, very much appreciated. Thank you very much. The next thing, if we're set with that for a moment, is that the Board of Selectmen had an agenda item which was discussion on community development issues, that we just really wanted to have a more in-depth conversation with respect to planning's view. I know I've met with certain members, appreciate Pat's time, just kind of really trying to further this initiative with respect to, really honing the process and, the effect that we're looking for. So I just kind of wanted to pitch that out. The community development coordinator position was, conceived of in a strategic planning meeting by the Board of Selectmen in an effort to really look ahead at a lot of problems that were confronting the town, whether it's coastal resiliency, or traffic, the fact that we're a tourism community, but we're also a year-round community, connecting our historic properties, connecting our, the performance areas, say, up at Falmouth Academy, for example. Just the, a general thought to how can we, look at our year-round, the important things to our lifestyle, make sure we're planning the best we can for that, in moving it into the future in a financially responsible way, and at the same time kind of make it fit all together and coordinate better. So that was kind of one of the general thoughts. I don't know if anyone else from the board wants to point out anything in particular. I know, Sam, you've had a lot of work on this topic.
Yes, and I do want to say, I know we got some feedback on the proposal on the Collins report, and even Town Manager Suso is recommending, reconfiguring physical facilities to try to maybe make it easier for people to work together. But I have to tell you, having worked for corporations of 1,000 or more people, worked on $10 to $50 million projects with resources spread all across the country, it isn't proximity, it's communication. And if I'm going to put money into something, I think I'm more interested in facilitating, if you will, the orchestra leader and using that, which I think is actually a less expensive effort than redoing facilities. And so I just want to make that comment that my experience in working on very complicated military systems is you need coordination of people to really make a difference in terms of the outcome and the efficiency with which you get things and the quality that you get. And now and to this day, with internet and connectivity, you're better able to communicate, but it still takes that human being that connects people together, because I've worked with an awful lot of engineers that don't talk to anybody. And if you can't go down there and find out what they're doing and make sure that what they're going to contribute, it fits into the contributions from everybody else, you're not going to end up with a workable system. You know, we're human beings, and we don't just naturally communicate in all cases. There's all levels. Sometimes say my son's sort of on the autistic side of the spectrum because he doesn't communicate with me. Of course, I'm his parent, but you know, that element of human communication is the most critical part of making an organization function more effectively with higher quality and less cost. Not necessarily facilities, because I've worked in literally, we talked about trailers, I've worked in places where there were about 20 acres of trailers, and you still had to go from place to place, and guys working in the same trailer weren't even talking to each other.
Yeah, and I think I've said this before, and you know, we got feedback from planning board, from other folks who are up in town about sort of concerns or critiques that they had of the report or just of the concept in general. And you know, I think again, it's really still in its infancy, but I think for me the idea, and I know some of our conversations was really about the idea of elevating planning to a level where it's something that is part of and built into really what the town is doing every single day. Because of we've talked about a number of issues, housing, all of these things that are challenges and continue to be challenges going forward, and that the idea of somebody whose role it is to sort of coordinate and pull together and kind of facilitate some of that communication. You know, to me the idea was, and again it can be worked in different ways, but the concept still remains, or the need still remains, to really bring all of these needs to a level that is of a priority, you know, and just kind of sitting in a position of priority for the town, because we have all of these various committees and departments and groups that do really important work, and then somehow, we've talked about this before, the connections don't get made, and a report sits for a while, or, you know, we have kind of things that we're just reinventing the wheel over and over again. But I think that as a community, you know, we have these real challenges. We've had them for a while, but I think they are really pressing right now. You know, the price tag for everything has gone up. You know, so all of these pieces about being resilient, about building smart, about keeping workers here, drawing new workers here, not just being able to keep the folks we have, but becoming a place that draws people in. You know, all of that, I think, requires some level of coordination, whether or not it's a particular position or whether it's kind of configuring things differently. I think that my feeling about this is there's a real value in just that being a spotlight. And I think that that's why this arose out of that conversation, that recognition that should be spotlighted in a way that maybe isn't happening. And I know we've heard from folks on the planning board about why that might not be happening, and from other folks, you know, we've had those conversations about other ways that might be possible to do that. But I think that need is still there, and so it just remains a priority. And again, I think it's not about a critique of anybody not doing what they're supposed to. It's the recognition of how significant those challenges are and how they're going to remain going forward.
Doug?
And my take on what we have now is that Mr. Suso is managing a lot of departments. It's not probably the best arrangement, because one person interacting with 18 or 19 different department heads, I think we just added more, is not really effective. So this is the way that we thought we would move forward, because it takes the planning and the zoning part of it and makes a sort of a department out of that. That would be one way to take off some of that workload and also create a new initiative in that planning direction. If that's not working for people and we don't go that way, then we're going to have to think of another way. I don't know if Mr. Staub would maybe then take some of that workload. We haven't explored that yet because this was our preferred option, but this is what we were working on, and we found we were running into some feedback, and people, I think, were misconceiving what we were thinking of, or maybe we were misreading the feedback.
Yeah.
Right before I moved here, the town of Acton had designated about $675,000 to, when you walk into town hall, the whole left side of the building is now land development. And we have now a community development person. And it's planning, health, engineering, conservation, and zoning. So I took a field trip because I wanted to see what my tax dollars had gone for, and got a chance to talk to our conservation director and planning, and how does it feel? And the one difference was they're in a fishbowl. You know, it's pretty much glass, and they have their own offices, and they were used to going in, shutting the door. The town manager meets with every town director every week, once a week. So it's not as if he stepped out of that job. It's just now there is someone, if the Board of Health has an issue and wants to go to somebody and can't get to Steve Ledoux, he has now someone to go to. And so the coordination with conservation and zoning and building, it's now, there's sort of an intermediary person who can make decisions that takes some of the onus off of the town manager, although the town manager's involved. And so they're really enjoying now having someone to make an instantaneous decision, whereas trying to work through, if it's not a Friday when they're meeting, and it seems to be working really well.
Were you able to discern practical things like are permits getting approved quicker? Did builders feel happier with the system?
Right. The builders hated coming to the town. They said it was too splintered. They had to go from one to another to another to another. Now they walk in, there's a common application, sort of like when you apply for college. And so I picked up all that paperwork, and I picked up all the cards of everybody who's in there, and I offered Sam and anyone else who'd like to go on a field trip and just talk to people and see what it feels like. Because I think if you do that, when you present a town meeting, you'll come from a place of, I've talked to people who have done this, and this is how it's working. So now we have builders that are willing to come, and we have many lit projects, friendly 40 whatever, who want to come and build now, because it's streamlined the process. And that's what I think here is what we need, so that you can't help but communicate, because now you have somebody who's there for everything that has to do with building, developing, resiliency, whatever it is. So I think it's worked well, and I think it would work well here.
Interesting. Anyone else?
Well, I think most of you know that I was rather opposed to the Collins report. I didn't make any bones about it. And there were a number of reasons. But I will point out that I think that calling this new division or department or whatever you want to call it, only community development shortchanges. Because, and I can underscore this with a newspaper article I read maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, that Barnstable used to have community development, and they changed it to community planning and development because it would allow greater capacity to seek monies from the state and the feds. Community development cut them right out of that. And I would really suggest that you think strongly about calling it community planning and development.
That's easy in my mind.
Well,
Never intended to exclude anything.
development needs planning. I think everybody will agree to that. You just don't develop without planning. So that underscores everything. Something that you won't know probably, I think I told Sue, is that Mary Pat and I sat down with Mr. Suso probably a number of years ago and talked about a similar plan. I am certainly not opposed to this type of organization. I think it will facilitate a lot of things, as you were just talking about. But my problems came in with economic development has not, it was tangentially mentioned in the Collins report. This is big, folks. That's what we're all talking about here. is making the town more economically sustainable. So I think when you're talking about getting a very new and important person in here, you need to think about getting somebody in whose field is seeking out the types of companies that would locate here in Falmouth and then courting those companies. That's what Boston did. Look what they are reaping, folks. They're getting some very large companies leaving Connecticut and moving to Boston. It's now the sneaker capital of the U.S. And so that's something else I think that should be thought about in getting this person in or getting somebody else in who can do that. A number of the existing problems, I think, and I brought out when we met with the Collins Group, have to do with, we've gone through some pretty difficult economic times and we didn't have enough people to fill posts, so that people were overly busy and didn't have the time to communicate as they might if they weren't so busy. I know from my experience when I was interviewed, the fellow from the Collins Center was totally surprised that I had no clue what was going on. I tried to find out, and nobody seemed to know what was going on. This is bad communication. If you've had it in your plan for 3 years, why didn't it filter down? Furthermore, the things that were in the Collins report about the local comprehensive plan, I have no idea where you got that information from. They never met with us, and we did everything that they criticized us for not doing. So that really left me.
That was unfortunate, and that's not realistic.
No, that is not realistic, but that also made me question, how many of the staff and the department heads did they really talk with in depth to find out anything about it? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not making an accusation, but I'm saying if they really spent a lot of time talking about the local comprehensive plan in there and had no clue what they were talking about, I really have a problem with that. So I hope you understand that I think such an organization would be extremely beneficial for the town, but it needs to be done a whole lot differently than the Collins report did.
Well, I think one thing that's clear from your point, which is, crucial feedback for the board, is that this initiative, I think, is going to have to be worked much closer with the planning board, in terms of point to point. And we've made some headway with that, just in speaking with members of the board, but I think absolutely agreed that there needs to be a lot more work together.
Oh yeah, and when I looked at the Collins report, let's see, the administrative assistant for the planning board was going to be shared by the new head of that department, and we were already down a full-time planner.
Practical issues as well.
How in the world would you expect the planning department to function?
Well, especially when the initiative is geared for efficiency and forward thinking. So, point well made, Doug.
I think a lot of these are just to be taken as ideas and examples, because if you look through the whole thing, it's always showing different options and different ways that you can shape and mold this to
that
work
one
with your own
wasn't
town.
Doug.
Well, I'm just saying, but you can tell it's
Oh, yeah.
more generic. It's not really specific to our town, and they certainly didn't really completely understand our town. But it's the structure idea, and they're just, the way they show so many different examples of how it could be moved around, I think that's just another example of something that could be certainly reworked.
Doug?
One of the things that you had suggested that about the planning piece and saying you should call it this, I would hope it would be, we are going to call it this, that this is something that our two boards, and ideally the zoning board and the appeals board, are also saying, all the boards are saying, yep, this is the way to go, not something just the Board of Selectmen are saying, because with your support, I think it can work beautifully. Without it, it won't work at all. On your point on the economic, the only reason why I could see that the Collins Center was not as specifically put in there is that we'd already said that. That's where we started with this whole thing, is this needed to be someone who was going to be really looking forward to the future of economic development. And it may have been they knew that was something we had already stated, because that's where it first started 3 or 4 years ago. I think the planning board is extremely important, but the economic was without it, there was no point in doing it.
Well, it got born, this whole thing got born a little too soon, not from your perspective, because it was in your 5-year plan for 3 years already, but it got a little born just a bit too soon, because there was no discussion such as we're having tonight.
Right. And I think your criticism of some things the Collins Center report are spot on. Really unfortunate but I think it's going to end up being a better discussion, and we'll be able to go back to town meeting with a much better request as to why we all think this is the way to go.
Mm-hmm. Another important takeaway, what you just said, I think the 4-board meeting that I think was the first that you had as chair, would be great to to go ahead with that as well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something, Mr. Suso, if you could just put back on the radar and maybe get some input from planning about what a good time might be to have that. Also, of course, with the Board of Appeals and zoning, depending on what you're working on. I think that would be a good, you'd be spearheading, obviously, that next meeting.
Madam Chair?
Sam?
I just want to say I have no problem throwing planning into the title of this person, but that's somewhat exclusive, because it needs to include conservation. It needs to include health. I mean, it needs to really be a big umbrella kind of coordination job. And so when you start targeting particular departments,
I took it as the concept,
So
like
did
the
I.
verb.
I understand the concept.
The verb, yeah.
but you're talking about semantics here, and somebody else is going to interpret it somewhat differently. So I think we have to be careful, and the communication is absolutely critical as to how this is actually going to benefit all of the departments.
Yeah.
So I'm having deja vu listening to this conversation about what we call it. We wound up with land use development, because that really encompasses everything. It encompasses economic development, because any of that uses land, and because we don't have sea around that town. But as I was listening, I thought, man, I've been here before. It's just
Charlotte?
I just wanted to throw another idea into the thought of what actually is sort of a reorganization of planning functions. I'm glad to hear there's going to be further conversation about it, because from my experience working in large organizations like Sam, I have, and it was in Boston government, where frequently the thought was, well, if we just had one person, it would fix it. And that person usually would be layering other people. It didn't fix it. It created another barrier, another difficulty, another to-through on all of your memos. It didn't help. It really hurt. And what did seem to help was systems analysis and finding more times for face-to-face conversations among the people who really do need to be speaking to one another. And it seems to me that Falmouth, of course it's complex, I don't mean to see that it isn't, but it's small enough to be able to do that, just like tonight. So that there are ways to do that, and it could be that staffing from under to make the departments more effective so that those conversations are richer is a better, and actually in the end, cheaper way.
I love how you turn the idea upside down, so we look at both sides. That's terrific.
And just as a system, I think you're putting your finger on, I think what people have been sort of talking about, but we're talking about a systemic change, right? And we're not talking about, it's not about a single person or a single position. It's that whole piece of it, and needing to change for really what are the growing needs of our community. And the system that we've had for a while worked fine and served us well, but we're not that community anymore, and we don't have those same challenges that we did 30, 40, even 20 years ago. We're in a different place. So I think that system analysis is a really key point.
It would be very helpful, because when you add a person like this who's going to be a middle manager, they're robbing authority from all the departments you're now going to crowd under them, and that makes them less effective, not more effective.
Very good point. Anyone else? Paul?
Collins' quote was very interesting. They presented several challenges and areas for improvement. Virtually all of those can be done without reorganization. They can be done right away, and I would encourage you to do that. The other one is the organization chart they showed was a community development coordinator over all these different functions. And then B was the building department separately. We have a new building inspector, and that's a separate entity. I believe that's required by state law. And then we have the other items. Well, there really is a short-term and a long-term function there. In the short term is a lot of the things that the issues we're coming up against, conservation, permitting, and all the things that really need the coordination according to the Collins report. The other one is a long-term function, perhaps under the town planner. Could be housing, could be long-term planning, and those kinds of things. And that's a very different function than the short-term ones. So I could see that. I'm in favor of reducing the number of reportees going up to the town manager. We talked about that years ago when Mr. Sousa first came here and I was on the Charter Commission. But I think there's very different functions in those, and by complicating those, I'm not sure you're going to solve the problem with one coordinator. And I think that's what you're suggesting as well.
That's a good point. I just wanted to see if Mr. Curry wanted to pitch in, or Peter, coming from a different community, maybe that handled this a little bit differently, if you want to just kind of jump in.
I wish I had some easy answers for you. I think the conversation has been terrific. I think that the point about we can have the best organizational structure in the world, if we don't have our systems right, we're nowhere. It's like saying let's have customer service training, but then we have systems that are Byzantine and fragmented, and we have the most pleasant people in the world but can't solve anyone's problem. So it really is, it's a comprehensive package. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'm a big fan of reducing the span of control for the town manager. I'm staggered by the amount of work that Julian does every day. I don't know how he does it. But that's not a silver bullet. That's not the only thing that needs to be done if we're going to really make progress on all of these issues. So yes, I come from a town that has a community development department. Economic development was put into the mission of that director, and I think that was helpful. It was driven by the mission of the Board of Selectmen. They were very clear that they wanted to stimulate economic development. That directive went through all of the departments: building, conservation, health, planning. We're all trying to work together. They understood that the goal was, yes, they have a mission and they have bylaws and regulations that they have to enforce, but they were always looking to do it in a way that stimulates economic development. That's a cultural thing that I think that we can work on, but support staff and systems are vital, and without those things in place, we're not going to make a lot of headway.
I appreciate your point, because that kind of puts, brings together what members of the planning board had said. Mr. Curry, did you want to add your 2 cents, or?
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Brian Curry, I'm the town planner. You're very right. It's not the same town I came to serve 27 years ago. The problems were different then than they are today. But the board is not tackling something that's unique or new. If you go back to the 1988 Mass Municipal Association study of the town's government that came in 1988, it was the basis of the town's decisions to move towards a part-time board of selectmen, and was the basis of the town's charter. And in that report, you will see the recommendation for a planning and community development department. I believe I gave my copy to Christina Callahan before she left. She was her personnel director. I'm sure it's still up there, or I can get a copy for you. Many towns have this type of organizational structure. It's nothing really new. I think it's just how the devil's in the details and how it gets done. And you'll have to craft that very carefully. And I think it's very important to talk to your boards, your citizen volunteers. And I think it's really important to talk to the staff, because they're the folks on the front line who love to serve this great town. And together, we'll get there. I'm not worried.
Very, very interesting. Thank you so much. And lastly, I see Mr. Haddad in the back. In terms of the historic aspect, did you want to add a view?
Ed Haddad, Chairman of the Historical Commission. I think from the report, the one thing that was probably most disappointing to me was the uniqueness of Falmouth in that we have 7 historic districts. And I didn't see that mentioned and recognized. And that's a tremendous asset to this town. You know, and the coordination of that, the protection of it, the capitalization of it, how we use those assets, was not even reflected in there. And I thought that was a big shortcoming and a shortcoming to the town of not recognizing the value that Falmouth has in that rich heritage.
That's a great point.
Thank you very much.
I just want to say this meeting is one of the richest and robust communication forms that we have. And I think in the charter it says twice a year to do this. And my suggestion would be, I don't know how you have to deal with the charter here, but that's too old. And communication, because of the internet and everything else, it just doesn't work anymore. I mean, not that the internet doesn't work anymore, but face-to-face conversations. And I think when you put in conservation and zoning, it dilutes it too much. But I think if part of your structure was to meet with each board on a regular basis, I think things would function, you know, with Charlotte's whole idea of the systems. That's how systems begin to evolve. But if there is not that communication, if there isn't that communication, then I don't think you put systems in place appropriately. And I think, Julie, in the same way, you know, for you as the town manager, to maybe come to a planning board meeting. I know you have nothing else to do. And, you know, if you're looking to we'll make that number 11.
It's not very exciting.
But just every now and then, just to come, and we'll have something special. We'll break brownies or something. But I mean, I just think it's really important for people to know, you know, who everyone is in this town. Our League of Women Voters used to have a town social, and all the town boards got together, because if you don't know each other, you can't trust each other. And if you want to build community, you need to trust each other. So I'm going to actually propose that to the league. You can take those notes there that I'm going to propose that.
I think that's a great idea. The town manager has had, a couple of social events inviting all the boards. So, that's one thing I want to recognize and appreciate. And also this board at our strategic planning meeting sort of re-energized our goal to meet with every committee at planning and really to work with any kind of annual report or initiative that committee may want to bring. I think Doug had golf in right away. The accessibility committee is coming, and so
solid waste is coming in October. So we're
bad visual.
I know, not solid waste advisory. Yes, committee is coming. But I think that's part of sort of a reinvigoration of that communication. But I would just put that out there too, that goes across, and we've talked about this, I have at some of the committees that I'm a liaison to, that goes to the committees and the other boards as well. I mean, there has been, we need that, there's a lot of cross, we were talking about that at Affirmative Action, how
right.
that and, the Commission on Disabilities has some real crosswork that can be done. So really connecting those committees and those boards, we're a lot of what we talked about tonight really wraps in zoning. So, for all the boards and bikeways to really have that communication, you're right. I mean, it just has to happen, and maybe it hasn't as much as it needs to. And so that's part of this initiative.
I want to be careful about us promising too much. We have 37 committees in town, and to promise that we're going to get.
How many times a year do you meet?
Right.
Exactly.
It's a great idea to try to work towards, but we have to be careful that we really cannot promise that we can meet them.
Absolutely, but we do have that goal, and the town manager has already set in motion the invitations and putting that initiative together, because it was done for years. And one thing that you've talked about is that, it'll give us, I think, an opportunity to maybe look at that number of 37 and see what really makes sense. So I think we have to look at both of those goals. Anyone else?
I'm sorry, let me just clarify to Doug's point. I don't mean we're having 37 sit-down meetings for 2 hours. I'm talking about committees being, really invited and encouraged to report at least once a year to us, some of the important work that they're doing. And just for those lines of communication to be more open, it's certainly, Doug's point, it's not feasible, it's not even possible to do this for every committee, but that's not required for every committee or board.
Absolutely. Jim, anything else on your side?
No, I've seen community, in my travels around the Cape and working on developments in different towns, I've seen it work, and I'm in favor of it. It's quite impressive for me when I go to Chatham, to go in there, the community development officer's a person to meet you right there, and then they don't send you other places, they call the people in, and you gotta talk to this person. You walk out of there and you're on your 3/4 of the way here.
Right.
Our town, they try, but you gotta go with a lot of different places, gotta go run around the different offices, you gotta go to the DPW building, you got a checklist of a lot of people, and if you don't know your way around, you're not gonna get the permit, period. And so we need to work. I think we've always been talking, there's an ombudsman role there too. Maybe not this person, but someone underneath this person that would, because a lot of people come into the building department or the town, they're lost and afraid. They've heard bad stories and they don't know what to do. And we hear it all the time about the roadblocks that our town puts up to people trying to get things done. And we don't, it's just the way it appears.
I think just, those are all important points to address, obviously. Just 2 comments. One is that, the ZBA has a process where they do get everyone together and review projects. So I think that's, they're doing a good job of that, like, kind of an area we do it well. And I have to comment, I was meeting with, and Mr. Sousa was touring some folks from Plymouth County, and their biggest takeaway just stepping in and out of the building was, wow, you have a welcome person at the door who tells people if they have a question, where they might find an answer, and what we should do that. That's a great idea. So the ombudsman idea, I think we have, in some capacity, I think that could be, certainly broadened and serve the issues that you were bringing up. But, those are, great time to talk about it so we can maybe expand those roles.
So if I just may,
Sure.
I know Peter has raised this point at different points in time, but, we really are, and no one ever wants to hear this, but I think, Pat, you may have mentioned it too, we are really understaffed for the amount of work that we want folks in this building to turn out. Again, we're staffed, we had cutbacks when they had to happen, and we didn't really refill some of those positions because it was just what we had to do economically. But, there are a lot of projects, there's a lot of work that comes through this building, so it's, I think it's just important to recognize, as Brian is talking about, just hear from staff, because they're the folks who are doing it every single day, and they're gonna, I think, have some really good suggestions about things that can be improved, how things can be improved, even with the number of folks that we have, at this current staffing level. So, just, again, it's never gonna be a knock on the people who are working here, because I think that they're really taking on a lot, doing a lot of work, again, in a setting that's sort of for a smaller town. I mean, we're not that small town anymore.
The item here about consolidation departments. As a private citizen, I sent a letter to the board about 4 months ago with a concept about repurposing some buildings. The example I gave may not have been a good one, but I think the concept of repurposing some of these buildings for some of the things might be appropriate. I received no response as a private citizen, but I mentioned that I think that's something they want to consider also.
I am having a brain fart, or I never got it. I don't know if it was the right email or not. Would you mind resending that, if you have it handy? Or maybe the town manager has it to redistribute?
Well, the example may not have been a
It
good
should be
one.
reviewed, obviously.
Mrs. Suso has it.
Okay, that'd be great. So we'll make sure we review it and get back to you. Apologize, it should have been even a...
No, I'm not looking for that.
Part of
We're talking about communication, and here's a communication that is a valid point, I think.
No, and I...
You say get lost.
No, I'm looking...
I think I did send that and then erased it.
I want the idea so we can review them.
And consolidation is something that, I'm sorry, Sam, is something that we've been, it's been a focus, it's been a charge that our town manager has had, so certainly it's always something that I think is on the front burner, trying to figure out how to make that happen.
It is an objective.
Yeah.
that's part of what we're supposed to be doing. But thanks for bringing it up and reminding us.
Just one point that maybe brought up that I just do want to emphasize is just a reminder that a lot of these boards are volunteer boards also. You know, these are people that come in and give their own time and not full-time, so they need more support as well.
Good point. And that's one of the reasons that we want them to be able to put their work out there more so that folks can understand how much they're giving, the thought process, the great ideas that come through the community board. So, very good point.
Madam Chair, could I just interject one thing? Just a suggested connection between an item that was talked about earlier, the accessory apartment bylaw. In my view, again, this is just conjecture understood, but I believe that this type of enhanced coordinative and collaborative community development structure within departments could have facilitated a more proactive approach to the accessory apartment bylaw and might well have alleviated some of these issues that we're getting now, finding out later that maybe the Board of Health was left behind, or there was a few lingering issues that we thought were perhaps addressed, but somehow got missed in spite of our best efforts. And I know some of that was that at least a few of us were really gratified at how quickly the town meeting adopted that concept, embraced it, and passed it. And some of us are used to 2 or 3 kinds of town meeting discussion processes prior to these things being adopted, which is a sort of a vetting procedure in a way. So I just suggest that had we had someone occupying that coordinated position, it might have facilitated the kinds of, some of that connectivity that might have brought the Board of Health and their issues in a little more openly and rapidly. So I just toss it out as an example.
That's a huge point, because I'm thinking back now, when the concept originally came up with Selectmen, one of the key points was, coordination and really being sure that whether it was coordination among boards or outreach with the public, that some of these important initiatives get better planned from the beginning and really get accomplished maybe in a way that more people are supportive of and that benefits more people. So that you point out a very, very key point.
I can see the parking and transportation be another one where that's trying to pull together so many different committees.
True.
To accomplish something that's going to benefit everybody.
Very good point. Anyone else? This is a terrific meeting. I really thank you for your time. Very enjoyable. So much, brain trust here and looking at things from different viewpoints, turning them upside down, really thinking about them. Jim, if you want to take a
All
motion.
right, that was great. Motion to close the joint meeting with the planning board.
So moved. Second?
All in favor?
Second, aye.
Second?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're all done?
And the Board of Selectmen?
Motion to adjourn.
And come back to open meeting. We'll take a break. Is that all right? Recess, thank you. That's what